The Business of Cleaning, the podcast that brings cleaning industry expertise straight to your ears. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Business of Cleaning. My name is Haley Morris, and I'm your podcast coordinator and host. Today with me, I have a special guest. I've actually called up a longtime friend from high school. His name is Oliver Greive, and he is going to help us talk about data security and making sure that you're not letting anybody in that you don't want to. So I'm going to let Oliver introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Oliver Greive. I'm an experienced designer at UPMC Health Plan. So I don't come from a cybersecurity background necessarily, but being a remote worker and just being inundated with tech all the time, it's good to know best practices. So hopefully I can share some of those ground level best practices with you all today.
Thanks, Oliver. So we brought Oliver in particular just because Oliver both represents one of your users and also has a great background in working with people and systems and understanding, a lot more about our team members and ourselves and how we're going to interact with those systems. Also, the likelihood of getting one of our developers on for this call is very slim. So I know, not huge fans of being on camera. At least our team is not. But we wanted to kind of start off and talk about maybe some of the things that you can do up front, like you can start doing right now to make sure that your systems are secure with the modern age and with where we've come in the world. 2020 hyper digitalized everything. And I know we've seen some of that shift in the industry as well with more software systems and more options coming onto the market for you to get your data into the cloud, just share it easily with employees, streamline your communication, your inventory tracking, your workloading, things like that. All of that is great, but if it's not secure, it could put you at risk. And so Oliver and I were talking earlier about one of the easiest and most upfront things you can do. And that starts with our email, correct, Oliver?
That is true.
So I'll let Oliver start by talking about why email communication is a huge thing to watch and one of the first and easiest areas you can address for your security.
Yeah, so thank you for that tee up, Haley. Email kind of feels like home base for a lot of us working remotely or working through software in any way. It can feel safe, and a lot of us let our guard down with our inbox. We might be able to click on an email that comes in without thinking about it. We might click on links in that email without thinking about it. And despite what it might look like from Outlook or whatever application you're using, not every email that comes in is as official or as good-natured as every other one. So just earlier last week, I'd say, I actually received a phishing email in my work inbox. And what's kind of funny there is I don't know if it was a test or not, but it also doesn't matter because, even if it is a test from whatever company or anything, still best idea is to avoid it, report it, if that's a possibility. And most importantly, don't click on anything contained in it. A lot of times they'll send out malware through email. It's still the most common attack vector for that purpose. And even if an email inbox like Outlook or Gmail, or I know Apple has their own, even if that service puts up front that they have a spam filter or something like that, of course, there are still ways to get around those. So it's worth being extra selective in what you're engaging with in your email inbox.
I was going to say, I had one came to my personal a little bit ago. It was probably a couple months ago, but I remembered it because 2 days ago, my friend got a very similar one. And it looks like it comes from a well-known brand. So mine looked like it came from LifeLock. Hers looked like it came from Best Buy. And those are really established brands, really recognized ones that you're like, okay, yeah, I trust them. And it looked like an order receipt. And funny enough, we've gotten a similar one through our work email. We have a marketing email set up for our team, and we got what looked like an order receipt for something, and with us paying for shows and doing a lot of things, I handle a lot of order stuff with our admin coordinator. It looked legit, and we're like, what did we pay for? We were worried we had just spent $3,000 on something that we didn't have any idea. So there were, and then one of the things that I always do, I have the email app on my phone for Apple, but then I also have the Outlook app on all my computer and devices, is checking the domain to see if the sender matches what it says it is. Because a lot of times it's coming from some random Gmail. So the most common our team gets are emails from the CEO asking to really quickly text him, and here's his number, right? And things like that, which we haven't gotten a while. We've started to be able to block those more easily, but it comes from a random Gmail, and a lot of our team members have fell for it. And now this new one, there's no link to click. There's no link to click to sign in or do things like that, because normally you'll see where they want to collect your information if you click the link or whatever. They want you to sign in through there. It wasn't. It was just a number to call. And so I was talking to our developer. One of the things he said is they're going to have you call this number. They're going to pretend to be this company, and they're going to ask you to verify all your profile information and probably your credit card information while you're on the call. So she got a similar one, and she was quick. She checked with her bank. But we did a little Googling on the email address, which almost looked legit, and the phone number to try to track them back and find where they belonged. And also, once again, if it's a recognizable account, like if you do have an account through Best Buy or somewhere else, signing into the account on the website versus the app.
Right. Well, good on you for checking that background info, the phone number and the name. If I can make like a suggestion out of that or something, another best practice for people is if you receive something that looks fishy, that looks sketchy to you, that's kind of an opportunity to play detective for a little bit, like make a game out of it. If you can verify who this source is, if anything looks out of place, it can be kind of fun. Looking at a logo they might have attached that's just a little bit off, like not quite the Best Buy logo, or it might look like a screenshot of a Best Buy logo. Like it's a little more pixely than normal. It's interesting with the phone number that you mentioned that they didn't put anywhere down to put anything in a website or anything like that. In a way, that sort of makes sense if it's a low-cost way to field all that info without needing to put time and money into making a form or a website.
Right. And the crazy thing about this one, and I didn't get to see the email my friend got, but this one built a lot of trust within you. The email looked more legit. It looked like a store email, one of those goofy little store emails with the store number on, like at LifeLock, whatever. It looked more legit. So they had purchased probably a similar domain to what LifeLock had, or something of that nature. And this was a scam, and it looked like an order receipt. If you'd never purchased from LifeLock before and haven't seen their emails, like I haven't, I don't know what their emails look like. It looks like a legit receipt that just told me I just signed up for a subscription that cost me $500, and that's coming out yesterday.
Yeah.
So that was alarming. And then one of the other things you look at, okay, is there a link to click? Because you don't trust links within emails, but all there is a phone number. If you have questions about your service or your subscriptions, call this number. Which we, as people who've gotten a little more used to scams and feel like we've gotten pretty on top of it, say, oh, well, why would they have a phone number if it's a scam? They don't want me to call it. Well, they do. They have people waiting on the other side of the line to pretend they're LifeLock and collect your information, and turn it from an email scam into a phone scam. It was very well thought out. At the surface, you might think cheaper, easier, but it seemed like something that was an established scam and was probably running for a while, or at least had a lot more forethought into it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That almost bait and switch of how it's being conducted, but establishing that sense of trust, and at the same time building in a real sense of urgency. Those all feel like things to be on the lookout for. A lot of this could probably lead to sort of a kind of level of distrust even with established or reputable brands and legit emails. But I'd say that's kind of small price to pay for being a little more flying closer to your chest, I guess, is a good way to put it. Not just throwing your info out there and engaging with everybody at face value. If a brand is legitimate, if a company is legitimate, they won't care. They know who they are. They won't care if you're being a little more skeptical of their intentions. They'll prove it to be otherwise.
Right. And coming from a marketing perspective, because I know there's some people out there who will say, well, I send marketing emails and I do this and that. And one of the things I have to say is coming from the business side, to build that trust, that genuine trust, so that people know that you're not scam, and so that they can have that healthy level of distrust when they don't know something, is where are you getting your email list? Are you buying them? Because I'm not a fan of that. But do they know you're emailing them? Have they signed up to get these promotional emails from you? Because permission is a big thing. One, that could come back and bite you in the butt. It's going to raise your spam reports. It's going to raise your bounce rates. It's going to get you blocked, and it's going to lower your brand authority, both on the email side and outside of it. But if somebody knows your email's coming, or they know to expect it, or they have that relationship built up with you, they're more likely to trust. Because one of the big you look at open rates, you look at click rates to see how successful your email is. And the thought is, okay, well, there's heavy distrust of links, so they're not going to click my links. Well, if they know who you are, like if I know somebody sending me information, I know exactly who it is, the domain is trusted, I expect that information, I'm not going to fear the links. Versus if I get a random email and it wants me to click this or blah, blah, I'm going to back up and probably not click any of their links.
Right.
So
that's an interesting perspective from the marketing standpoint. Working with email, working with those kind of channels to communicate through. I hadn't thought about that side of the equation. Just how do you, as a good actor in that situation, try to break through that noise and that level of healthy skepticism for people? That's a tough nut to crack.
right. And I'd say a lot of it is just putting more emphasis on building genuine relationships and genuine brand authority versus just trying to get the numbers in. And from a cleaning perspective, I know sometimes this is hard, but that means establishing good relationships with your current customer base. That means as you start to build up relationships with new customer bases, you're hopefully looking at a long-term relationship. Again, put in the effort. Don't just send them promotional emails to send them promotional emails. Really put thought into your correspondence with them. Make sure that everything is done with intent so that when they're getting correspondence from you, they trust it, they want it, and they don't mind if they get the occasional sales ask. If you're occasionally saying, hey, did you know we have these services? Because, oh, no, I didn't. Yeah, I'm interested to learn more. Goes a lot further than like constantly sending irrelevant content out. And, you as a team member too, I'm sure you get promotional stuff. Anytime you sign up for a subscription or whatever, you express interest in something, it seems like suddenly you are slammed. And the truth is that stuff is as much spam as anything else, but the brands will say that you signed up for it. So I think just from a brand perspective, that's one thing you can do to make sure that people are opening your emails and they don't think you're a scam. And it makes what you're sending come across as reliable. So
Yeah, that makes sense as a takeaway. Trying to maintain that trust and not knock down that house of cards too early, if it ever.
it might be an unpopular opinion for those who love email blast a little aggressively, but I love to send email blasts too. And if you're doing it right, you shouldn't have to worry.
It's a good mantra there. If you're doing it right, you shouldn't have to worry.
Right. This conversation isn't about your emails going in the spam inbox. So, all right. So we're looking at email. We're looking at identifying attempts to collect your data, to get malware on your computer, things like that. You're going to take that to the next level and then, train your teams to look for it. Communicate with your teams when you notice these attempts. A lot of times if we have one or two come through somebody's email at work, it's come through a lot more people. So sending a quick message in the chat to beware is really good. If an unrecognizable email, like for our payroll service, started sending us new emails, nobody trusted them. Good people. So our CFO reached out and said, hey, just to let you know, we are doing this. It's a new service offered. It's going to come from this email and you can trust it. So that'll go a long way in helping people feel secure in opening emails because they'll know where they come from, or secure in deciding that something is not trustworthy.
Yeah, it sounds like a great way to zoom this out a bit and look more at the organizational side. To echo a point from earlier, if you can make data security and spotting phishing attempts and that kind of detective work, if you can make that into a game on your own, it could be even more fun or more interesting to do that on a team. You can make a separate channel or separate email thread or something, just like, oh, spot the phishing attempt, something like that. There are ways to make that fun with a whole group of people.
Right. And our team loves to make jokes at it. So we'll have every time there's someone comes up, somebody always mentions the Saudi Arabia prince and all the dreams come true. Or, wait, that wasn't the sea. Somebody's got to be sarcastic about it. And we always have to make it fun and a conversational point. So, yeah, like you said, it can be, doesn't have to be a chore for you and your team. It can be something more fun and engaging that builds awareness for those attempts.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are some other things that people can look for when it comes to making sure that their data is secure, or some other things that they can do to make sure that when they're, working on the go, working remote, or even in at their office, that they're not leaking their data, they're not letting people into their systems unwillingly?
Right. So this, as a disclaimer, this is where I'm getting a bit out of my field of like training and real knowledge. Coming as an experienced designer, research and strategy side, I'm a lot more on that front end side of apps, products, services. But I still have an awareness of this next level, like on the network side. But feel free to fact check. Of course, I'm not going to make any huge claims that we don't already kind of know about. With that said, I'd say the next level or layer of things to look at is your network, especially if you're working remotely or working in a kind of unfamiliar place on a Wi-Fi network that potentially isn't secured. If it's a public Wi-Fi situation in, a Starbucks or I don't know if I can call it Starbucks specifically, but a coffee shop, an airport, hotel lobby, university, places that are marked free Wi-Fi, accessing those networks without adequate buffers or adequate protection through a VPN, virtual private network, that can be another vector area of risk where somebody can set up essentially a fake network that, like a phishing attack, looks completely accessible, completely legitimate. It'll look like city public library Wi-Fi with like an underscore where you wouldn't expect one to be, but there is, and that's actually set up not by the library, but by the dude in a hoodie 2 tables down from you that's looking at your keystrokes, looking at the emails you're sending. That's that other layer of risk where you can essentially enter somebody's own network, somebody's area that they have complete transparency over, including all of your private information. So that's something to be aware of. There are numerous options out there for VPNs. I can't really give a straight recommendation, but just look up VPN. There might be like a company policy where you can sign up a subscription with your work. There are options out there, and it's worth being aware of for sure.
Right. Right. And that I feel like is more and more relevant, especially if you're using a system like ours and you have team members connecting to you through the app or other things. You have to have a secure connection to connect on most of these systems and these apps. So they're going to look at, getting on a Wi-Fi and Or if you, as a business leader, are working on the go, you might be in that coffee shop situation or the airport situation quite frequently. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's as relevant now as it ever was, even probably more so with more people working remotely. Um, I'd say, especially if you're more in a leadership position there, you very well might have kind of a target on your back. So, I mean, the data that you have on your devices and the data that you're sending to and from, that's like gold. You got to protect that. So, important to be aware of.
right. And I've been on I've hosted a different show and we've talked about this with the Technology Institute of Oregon. Oregon. I've been in Sylvania too long. But we've talked to them, and data security was big, a year ago, 2 years ago. Now that we're traveling again, now that people are on the road, I know for this industry, trade show season is huge right now. Your people might be on the go a lot. Your management team, or your team members who are driving from location to location. So when you're on the go and you're in a different environment where you have to jump on a different network to connect, it becomes more and more important when you're talking about that type of thing.
Yeah, 100%. Especially hotels, if I could just call that out or reiterate that point. Speaking of traveling, hotels are kind of notorious for that. At least, not the hotels themselves, but the hotel use case, that situation where you might be feeling like you're letting your guard down, or like psychologically you're not at work, so you're not as security conscious potentially. It's a very common story. Somebody operating from a parking lot or just another hotel room in that place. Um, Another thing worth considering, worth being aware of.
Right, especially with remote work being so popular right now, and traveling has become a big part of those who embrace the remote work environment. They want to take advantage of the fact that they can work wherever they would like, as long as they're able to access their work content. So, all right, I think we could start to kind of wrap towards the end right now. We've had a good conversation. Like I told you, I want to keep this on the briefer side, but what are some of the longer term things to consider with security? And I know your background tends to veer a little away from this side, but that you're somewhat familiar. What are some things to consider if we're looking at long term securities?
Yeah, so to speak to what I know more on the product development or product strategy, product design side, including security professionals early on in a product design conversation as a key stakeholder, I'd say is just a great starting block for any company, any business. If you don't already have security IT professionals as a part of your organization, that's kind of a crucial first step, right alongside having the developers themselves actually able to build up your idea, having the security professionals working in tandem is just as important. And working in parallel with all of that, on the product design side, on the user experience side, having the actual digital strategy people work out the best possible market fit, best features, functionality, UI design, all of those elements. Um, all of these teams are essentially on the same team. Like they're working together, where security has an equal say in that matter and an equal kind of presence at that table. Um, I think culturally, this might be sort of a personal experience, my own bias or my own view of that situation. But it seems to me like security, infosec people tend to get pushed out of that conversation outside of the more kind of flashy front end, like design oriented people. Um, like those teams tend to get more of the spotlight. Maybe that's intentional, maybe it's not. But the back end and security people tend to not be in those early meetings and like strategic meetings, where I feel like that's a bit backward. Starting from those first principles of secure data practices, secure architecture through and through. It's like you can't build a house on a weak foundation. You can't build anything on a weak foundation. You need a strong presence in terms of network security, data security, before putting up the good roof or the nice paneling. And I say that as a paneling person and as a roof person. Windows maybe, but I realize that's also a bit, again, outside of my own personal scope. I haven't worked as a security professional, back-end engineer, any of those roles firsthand. Closest thing, I had a roommate who was one when we had an internship together as IT developers. I've seen that secondhand. I have not seen it firsthand or really worked in that. So again, feel free to verify, cross-examine. But I'm saying, as coming from my experience as front end, kind of product design side, that's my kind of say in the matter. Security, super important, should be more prevalent in our day-to-day conversations.
Right. And I'm gonna have to say, like, you don't have to you definitely, I feel like, have the credibility to speak to that because you are that front end person that you were talking about, that design person that gets to sit up there, that you kind of get to see sometimes. I'm assuming the earlier stages and as things come along, but it's also something I've heard a couple other times talking to people within the industry and within other tech sectors of the world, is that it is very, very common to put like the aesthetic and the front end interaction at the top of your priority list and to do all of that first and then forget security until towards the end. And if you're retrofitting for security later, it's never going to be as secure as if then you build it out with that in mind. So I have definitely heard that before. So I feel like that is one of the most valid points you can make is that this is, especially with so many people online and people who do make professions out of collecting personal information, that having security at the forefront of your thought. It's one of those functional aspects. We as people, I think, lean towards more aesthetic when we're creating things. We like the creativity and the fun side, but having the functional aspect of what the system needs to do, and one of those things is protecting the data that you entrust within that system. So, and then at the front end of our conversation, right before we hit record, you mentioned two-factor authentication. So I do want to touch on that before we go, because I know as human beings in the modern age, we can all agree it is a huge pain in the butt, but it's there for a reason. So
100%. Yeah, the phrase necessary evil comes to mind. I'd say, along with being aware of phishing attempts and being able to play detective, diagnose that, equally important is just to make friends with two-factor authentication. In my mind, it's here to stay, and probably the best way we have to protect ourselves on a personal level, just shy of taking on a VPN and all that good stuff. Two-factor authentication it seems annoying from the front end without knowing the real value in it. It might seem like just a daily roadblock, but if you reframe it, if you don't think about it as something in the way of you getting to where you want to go, like it's not a wall, it's more of a door, it's more of a gate, and you have the key. The key is your other device, or maybe your face if your device has a Face ID. It's like you can't expect to just walk into your house without an entry point, or to be able to walk clean through a wall. Our world has limitations, and the virtual world is no different. So you need the door. Two-factor authentication is the door. There might be some future developments there. There undoubtedly will be, to make that even easier to access. I've heard some talk of passwords just being done away with entirely, from actual security folks talking about this. Getting rid of the password as a design and security consideration, and just leading into two-factor authentication through either biometric things like fingerprint scanning your phone or face scanning, things like that. It's just another way to get into what you're trying to get into. Your software, your private portals, anything like that. Two-factor authentication is a friend, not a foe.
Right. I do feel like this ties in, as an individual in the workplace, enabling that authentication and embracing it rather than trying to figure out a way to get around it is huge. But also as, a leader in your company who's considering systems or having a system developed out for your workplace, it comes into play too, because one of the questions you should be asking for security and for that user experience is, how are people signing in? And what does that process look like? If it's a password and just a password, that it actually might be your cause for concern then. With that password, what are they signing in and doing? What is that opening up? And if somebody gets that password, what do they have access to if they're not part of the company? So building it out with that in mind, or if you are in the position where you're choosing to subscribe to a software and not developing an in-house option, which is very common, looking and asking, what are your security procedures? Like, what do you have built in for security to protect my information? How are my team members signing in? How is this accessible but also secure? And what do they have access to? Can be a huge thing and go a long way when you're talking long-term solutions and we're strategizing to implement these things into your processes.
Yes, 100%. That's very well put. A quick other note on passwords in terms of just practical steps. Similar to using a VPN, there are options for password managers that I'd recommend. I don't have any brands off the top of my head, but there's some really reputable ones that will store all your passwords, will generate new random ones that are harder to crack, more secure, and all of that data is encrypted in one place. Side note, worth looking into.
All right. And I think, I didn't know those existed, so that's kind of cool. But it is a good point. A lot of us will store it through Google or our phones.
I guess to reiterate a bit there, it's on par with downloading a VPN. Just another thing, a tool to be aware of that gives you an extra layer of protection if you're ever hacked. If you store all of your passwords on a device, especially on a device or in an account that is compromised and owned by somebody else, they can then just find all of your passwords. You can build in an extra layer of redundancy and protection there through an encrypted password manager. This might be more important or relevant if you have access to really sensitive data or like high value data, in which case you might already be familiar with this. But the value of a password manager is it is sort of like a vault, like a lock and key situation that stores all of your passwords. It also sometimes generates new ones that randomly generated and harder to manually crack or brute force crack. So something else to consider, to look into.
And that's a really great way for like our business leaders who might have access to multiple accounts for the business, or like me, I need some autofill. I'm not gonna lie, I need the autofill. But I need access to those passwords somewhere because there's so many accounts and there's so many things going on in this day and age that I have to have them saved somewhere. But you're right, like somebody gets into my phone, gets information to all of my passwords, or gets into my Google account, has all of my passwords, or wherever I have them stored, then there's a lot they have access to.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that can be a bit alarming. So it's another thing to consider, another way to make sure you're protecting your information, and something that you can communicate to team members as a security measure, something for their personal use and something for their use with work systems. And it can go a long way into decreasing your risk and things like that. One thing as a business that other professionals have seen is that businesses will get hacked or somebody will get in, they'll take control of all that information and they will ransom them.
Oh yeah.
And so,
Yeah, we haven't even touched ransomware yet.
right. And I have on another show talked about that. That's a topic that we could go into. And I can find somebody who's dealt specifically with that too if we wanted. But there is, when you open the door to risk, yeah, it's like leaving your house door open. Like, who's going to walk in? You don't have control of that now.
Yeah, pretty alarming stuff. This isn't specifically about ransomware, but a good thing to know, just to give an idea of the scope of this and just the reality of the situation. I didn't know about this until pretty recently, and I heard about it from another podcast specifically about cybersecurity called Darknet Diaries. I would 100% recommend listening to that. It's a great resource for learning more about this in a almost like a true crime fashion. It's really good. But the gist of this one is, on the dark web or deep web, there is an entire economy built around usernames and passwords. Like, your username and password would be a commodity to be bought and sold on the deep web. So these are exchanged. They're sold by the hundreds, thousands of cracked passwords designated as either FA, full access, or NFA, not full access. Full access being they would have access to all of your Google passwords with all of the, in a Google password manager, they will store all of your other passwords, like to Amazon, to Microsoft or whatever, like everything else. That's full access. Somebody can theoretically buy that username and password, change that password so you no longer have access to it if you don't have two-factor authentication lined up, and then have access to your credit cards, like your bank info, all of that. So yeah, the reality of the situation, like it could happen to any one of us. It's something that you always think is just a distant possibility, but it's worth investing some time and consideration into.
Right. So one of the things that I have, just to kind of emphasize that point, I have Venmo and I have two-factor set up on Venmo, and I forget about it because I don't have to sign in every time. Somebody had gotten my password and stuff somewhere along the line, and I had a sign-in attempt that came through twice in one day, about an hour apart. And they can only try to, because they have to enter my phone number and verify through there, and they didn't have my phone number. But yeah, that was alarming. I did change my password on that one. But you think if they have access to your Venmo, they could send themselves all the information from your account that they wanted.
Oh yeah.
And, who knows what else. I'm not super creative on stealing people's things. It's not my specialty, surprisingly enough. But there are people who get creative in that field. And when they have access to stuff, there's things that they can do with it that sometimes I think we can't imagine as easily. But yeah. And so I guess just to emphasize that point, that just happened a couple days ago, so,
oh, wow.
Well, probably like 4 or 5, so a bigger couple, but still just the other day. And that was very alarming. So, and it was like, yeah, you don't have to do anything because they can't get into your account without this information. But I did change my password because that just means that password was out there somewhere. And I looked at my old password I had and saw if I had it anywhere else and changed those passwords to something else entirely too, just to be sure. So
yeah, lots of people, they'll have like the same password with that, or repeat passwords. So good move on changing those.
Right.
Definitely scary.
Right. So, and yeah, I mean, it's just one facet. This could be a very long conversation, but like you said, there is a podcast out there that talks about stuff like this. The business of cleaning probably won't be your main resource for cybersecurity, but it is a good conversation to start to have right now, especially as people start to travel for vacations. And we all know there are many, many workaholics out there who do not turn their stuff off. for vacations, for trade shows, and for other things, as well as just going forward into more and more tech-focused, centered type work that it has become so ingrained into the things that we do. We have to pay attention to this.
Absolutely. Fantastic summary there. I hope this has been valuable for anyone listening.
Right. I think it has for me. I've learned a couple of things, and we talked before, and I've learned a couple of things since then. So I want to thank you, Oliver, for coming on the show, and I want to thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the business of cleaning. We had a little bit of a late release this month, but we'll be back on schedule for next month. And keep listening, because we'll have some more interesting guests coming on this year. And if you have an interest in learning more about cybersecurity, let us know. We'll give you some additional resources. And potentially pull somebody else in that we can dive deep if you're really interested in it. So thanks, everyone, and we will see you next month.